Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Master Sgt. Amy Anderson from the 11th Special Operations Intelligence Squadron, and I will serve as your narrator. On behalf of our host, the Commander, 1st Special Operations Wing, Colonel Michael Conley, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's breakfast and veteran panel. Please stand for the presentation of the colors, singing of the national anthem, and the invocation.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fights o'er the ramparts we watched, we're so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, let us go to God in prayer. Almighty God, Father, we come to you with grateful and humble hearts. Father, for over 200 years, you've blessed our nation with dedicated and selfless men and women in uniform, always prepared to defend our nation's freedoms. Lord, the peace and security that is ours today is a direct result of the continued contributions and sacrifices made each day by those standing in the line of duty. Lord, today we pay special tribute to the ones who were involved in Operation Thirsty. We're grateful for their courage and their selfless service to our great nation. May we never forget their leadership in the cause of freedom. Lastly, Lord, we ask your blessings on our breakfast this morning, as well as those who have prepared it. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you to the Hurlburt Field Honor Guard, Technical Sergeant Ashley Hirschfeld, and Chaplain Gary Coburn. We are gathered here in the spirit of commemoration for the courageous actions of the airmen and soldiers who participated in the aerial invasion of Japanese-occupied Burma during the Second World War. On March 5, 1944, the 1st Air Commando Group launched Operation Thursday and began the campaign that would ultimately halt the Japanese offensive in the China, Burma, and Dieppe theater. We are honored to be joined today by 3 veterans of Operation Thursday, as well as the author, who will help share their stories and experiences. Please join me in welcoming veteran of Operation Thursday and C-47 pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole, United States Air Force retired, and his daughter, Miss Cindy Shaw. Veteran of Operation Thursday and enlisted L-5 pilot, Senior Master Sgt. William Cartwright, United States Air Force retired, and his longtime friend and Vietnam combat veteran, Mr. James Diddy. Veteran of Operation Thursday and V-25H gunner, Staff Sgt. Patt Meara, United States Army Air Force, and his spouse, Carolyn. Our guest speaker and author of Project 9, The Birth of the Air Commandos in World War II, Dr. Dennis Okerstrom and his spouse, Jeanette. Also joining us are 3 sons of Fred H. Van Wagner, who was a light plane pilot with the 1st Air Commando Group. Ralph R.D. Van Wagner, author of Any Place, Anytime, Anywhere, along with brothers Bruce and Roger Van Wagner. We are pleased to also have several distinguished guests in attendance. Please hold your applause until they have all been announced. From the Air Force Special Operations Command Team, the Commander, Lieutenant General Marshall B. Webb and his spouse, Donna. The Deputy Commander, Major General Vincent Beckland. The Command Chief, Chief Master Sergeant Gregory Smith. Mobilization Assistant to the Commander, Major General James Scanlon. The Executive Director, Mr. Don Plater. The Chief of Staff, Colonel Clay Freeman. Additional members from the 1st Special Operations Wing Command Team, the Vice Commander, Colonel Michael Curry. The Command Chief, Chief Master Sergeant William Adams. Additional distinguished guests include Major General Richard Secord, United States Air Force retired, Major General Clay McCutcheon, United States Air Force retired, Chief of Staff of the Air Force Civic Leader Program Emeritus, Mr. Tony Hughes and his spouse, Mia, Commander, 24th Special Operations Wing, Brigadier General Claude Tudor, spouse of late Brigadier General Heine Adderholt, Mrs. Ann Adderholt, and Chief Master Sergeant Wayne Norad, United States Air Force retired. We also extend a warm welcome to all other wing commanders and command chiefs, civic leaders, honorary commanders, group and squadron commanders, directors, chiefs, first sergeants, veterans, and the men and women of Team Hurlburt. When you entered the ballroom this morning, you may have noticed a small table in the front of your room to the right. The POW MIA table is standing in the spirit of remembrance for our comrades who were taken as prisoners of war or listed as missing in action. At present, more than 83,000 Americans remain unaccounted for. Please join me in a brief moment of silence in remembrance of our fallen comrades. Thank you. Our goal today is to honor those who came before us, to learn from their stories and remember our heritage as Air Commandos. The 1st Air Commando Group was a composite unit of strike, reconnaissance, mobility, and assault aircraft. 75 years later, we still fight in much the same way. From Burma to Bagram, any place, anytime, anywhere. To share the significance of this historic occasion, it is an honor to welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Brad Webb. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Air Commandos. So Colonel Conley is clearly a poet, because we're going to talk about Operation Thursday on Fat Tuesday. Pretty cool. Hey, we are in for an absolutely rare treat this morning. And because I'm the only thing standing between you and breakfast, I'm going to limit my remarks to 30 minutes. Just kidding. But I do want to kind of tee this up because there's a saying that's in my, in my command brief at the headquarters that says, history makes you smart, heritage makes you proud. And it's, while it's kind of a dorky saying, there's a lot behind that. And really what it comes down to is culture. And if there isn't anything that I haven't been a part of this command about for the last 30 years, it's people coming up to me, to include the Chief of Staff of the Air Force yesterday, and saying, there's something about AFSOC. There's something about Air Commandos. And really, it traces right here, right to the very first Air Commandos in this room. So we're going to have the opportunity today to really get into that heritage piece. And it's just really an absolutely thrill of a lifetime to be able to have Dick Cole, Bill Cartwright, and Patt Meara here, and of course Dr. Okerstrom, to kind of lead us through this discussion of what it is that makes an Air Commando an Air Commando. And frankly, the theme, which I'm going to develop when out there in the 40 degrees here later as a Pittsburgh coming on out to the airport, we are them and they are us. So this is really the roots, the cultural piece of an Air Commando. And so you all are really blessed to be able to be here in the presence of these true American patriots as we get to hear some of the very early stages of Air Commandos. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here this morning. Have a great breakfast, and we'll see you out at the air park a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, General Webb. Now, if you will, please direct your attention to the video screens for the Operation Thursday Heritage presentation brought to us by the 1st Special Operations Wing Public Affairs Office. Following the presentation, breakfast will be served.
To build an airstrip deep inside Japanese territory and destroy the enemy from within.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are still enjoying your meal, please continue to do so. We are privileged to have Dr. Dennis Overstrand as a guest speaker this morning. He is Professor Emeritus of Park University near Kansas City, Missouri. He retired last spring after 35 years of teaching as the Mary Barlow Professor of Language and Literature. He is the author of 6 books. In 2015, his book, Project 9, Birth of the Air Commandos in World War II, won the Best Air Power book from the Air Force Historical Foundation. He has earned numerous awards from the university for his teaching and writing, including being named Distinguished Faculty Scholar and Distinguished Humanities Faculty. In 2018, he was honored with the university's first ever Presidential Meritorious Service Medal. He is also a veteran of the United States Coast Guard. He currently lives with his wife Jeanette in Independence, Missouri, and is conducting research for a biography of General Maxwell Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Dr. Dennis Overstrand.
Good morning. Good to see you all. Okay. First of all, thank you, Master Sergeant Anderson, for those really very kind words. And thank you, all of you, for the invitation to speak today. I really am truly honored to be here. This is where I'm supposed to say something about, all the distinguished guests. They've been already introduced, I think. But I realized as I was looking around that I'm not going to do that because every single one of you is a distinguished guest, all right? We'd spend the rest of the time just naming you by name. So another another thank you from me for all that you do quietly and without fanfare and out of the blinding glare of publicity. For what you do to keep us all free. You know, it's an old song, but we're the land of the free because of the brave, and that's you guys. Thanks. Yesterday, I was in the company of three heroes from World War II. These guys are often called the greatest generation, rightly so. But as we spoke with those young men and women yesterday at the Airman's Leadership School, I realized that I was looking at the faces of the future greatest generation. We haven't lost a step. We can count on them, you know, and that's a pretty good feeling to know that we're all in good hands. So I've been asked to speak today about Operation Thursday. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to have to do is to get coordinated with, you know, with my person over here who's going to change the slides for me. And I don't often do it this way, so if we get a little bit... So we're just going to leave this up for a couple of minutes. As I say, I've been asked to talk about Operation Thursday, which was a pretty audacious plan that occurred 75 years ago today. Okay? It was carried out by a few hundred of America's finest. There's kind of a major problem here for me, though. That's how do you tell this story in about the 15 or 20 minutes they've given me? Okay, well, seriously, that's what they gave me. I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try. So we are honored today. You've already been told that we have 3 veterans of Operation Thursday and the 1st Air Commandos with us. And you're going to, in a little while, you're going to get to talk to them directly and to ask questions. And I hope that you won't be very shy when you have that opportunity to chat with them and to ask those questions. But first, I need to do some really quick research. You know, that's what we academics do. I need to know if how many of you had or have a mother, either biological or adopted? Any of you? We'll see a show of hands if you had a mother. Okay, several of you. Yeah, that's going to make my job a little bit easier because most of you who had a mother probably remember something like this. Okay, you don't get dessert until you get through your spinach, right? Okay. I'm the spinach. They're the dessert. You gotta wait. Okay. And there it is. Here we go. I'm scratching body parts, trying to figure out how am I going to do this in such a short time. And I finally settled on maybe on the old journalism thing of who, what, where, why, when, and how. Okay? And you know the what. Operation Thursday. That's why we're here, the first ever aerial invasion of a country. And you know the where. You know that it was from Assam in northeastern India into Japanese-occupied Burma. And so, yeah, we're still going to just kind of hold this. We're good. We're good. We're going to hold this slide. You may be less familiar with some of these musical names like Lalagat and Halakandi, but you need to know they're part of your DNA. You maybe know a little bit more about them after today. The when is obvious. Operation Thursday was carried out on the 5th of March, 1944, which was a Sunday. Go figure. Okay. 75 years ago. Did you know that? 3/4 of a century ago. Okay. Now the why. Okay. This is going to take just a couple of minutes. Bear with me. Okay. After Pearl Harbor and the entrance of America into this second global conflict, the Allies really, really needed to agree on a strategy to fight this thing around the globe. And what they settled on was that we're going to take on Germany first and liberate Europe. Okay? And we're going to kind of have a holding action in the Pacific and the CBI, okay? Which is not to in any way diminish what went on in the fighting and the sacrifices, you know, the Allied troops over there during that time. It's just that, yeah, they were kind of the end, particularly the CBI, was the end of the supply line. They got what was left. Okay? And there wasn't really a lot going on over there in terms of American assets and personnel. They did, you've all heard of the Flying Tigers, they were there. And prior to Operation Thursday, we had a gallant group of flyers known as the Hump Pilots, flying those C-47s mainly, at least to begin with a service ceiling much less than the tops of the mountains they were supposed to fly over. But they did it. And at one time, in my research for a book I'm also working on about the hump, I discovered that flying the hump at that point was about as dangerous a job as you could get. They were losing more men than on round trips to Germany and back out of England. They ended up losing something like 1,000 aircraft on the hump. Dick Coles would know. But the Japanese had occupied Burma. They threatened to knock out India and China, or both, with disastrous consequences. China was really needed to keep some Japanese troops occupied, keep them busy, and away from other things going on, like maybe battles across the Pacific. It was also needed because they knew at this point that there was going to be eventually a long-range bombing campaign by B-29s. Okay. A quick aside, my father-in-law flew 68 combat missions in a B-29, most of them over Japanese cities. In 1943, because there wasn't a lot going on, and they kind of needed some good news, a fairly, let's just say, eccentric British general named Ord Wingate said, you know what, I think I can do something here. And he organized a long-range penetration group, Commandos. He called them Chindits. And they went into Burma in 1943 to simply disrupt what the Japanese were doing. They were blowing up bridges, and they cut communication lines. They just had a pretty good time, except there were a few problems. Okay. 3,000 men went in, and when they came out a few months later, they had to walk in. When they were supposed to be supplied by the RAF, dropping them supplies from C-47s, Dakotas as they were called by the Brits. When they came out a few months later, they were 2,120. There'd been about 450 killed, and another 450 who had to be left behind. Now that's kind of anathema, I think, to American military, but they didn't have much choice. If they got ill or they got wounded, they were simply left propped up against a tree with a canteen of water, a few rounds of ammo for the .303 Enfield, and a note that said, please treat this gallant soldier, as he should be. But they knew doggone good and well what was going to happen to him, and it did. Okay. That was, as you can imagine, a little hard on the morale for those who survived. When they got back into India, of those 2,120, there were only 650 who were considered fit for further duty. It wore them out. Okay. What they really needed was support from the American air power. And so a guy named Winston Churchill, some of you may have heard of him. He was like the prime minister or something of Britain. Okay. Wingate was one of his favorite guys, as it turned out, because they needed a few heroes over in that part of the world, and he was one. And so he invited Wingate, okay, read that as ordered, him to come back to London after that, and said, we could do this again, but I want you to sell the idea to the Americans. As it turns out, I just happened to be going across to Canada to the Quebec Conference, August of '43. You're invited, read order, okay, to go with me and sell your plan to the Americans, because we're going to have all the Joint Chiefs there too. Okay, all the Allied Chiefs of all the services are going to be there. So Wingate prepared a plan, he presented it. FDR loved it. He turns to Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, and says, make this happen. And Hap Arnold said, yeah, we'll be happy, because what he was asking for was light airplanes. He said, if we just had some light airplanes that could carry in supplies and maybe carry out the wounded, we could make this thing happen, like it should have happened before. We don't have any light planes in Britain, but America, you got thousands of them. Could we have a few? And so they said, yeah, we can do that. Hap, make this happen. Okay, says FDR. Hap Arnold said, yeah, we can make this happen, but he's a big thinker. He says, you know what, we can turn this thing into a demonstration of American air power that will really show what we're capable of doing. So he began the recruiting process, and he interviewed, and you already know this, maybe we could take a quick look, slide, at some of the folks here. So this is the who part of it. You probably already have seen this. This is the patch for the glider section of the 1st Air Commandos during Operation Thursday. He recruited a guy named Phil Cochran and another guy named Johnny Allison. I know they're already enshrined in y'all's Hall of Fame or something, you know, if you have such a thing. I don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but maybe we can take a quick look at a slide here of the 3 main characters here in this drama that's about to unfold. There they are. Okay. We have Gord Wingate, that's him in the Wolseley helmet on the left. Johnny Allison in the middle, and Phil Cochran. Phil Cochran, let's go ahead and take a look at a slide of Phil. Well, okay, so we've talked about this guy. He's a little eccentric. I won't spend any time talking about how eccentric he was. You can read that in lots of different places. This guy, you've seen that photo lots. Okay, he's charismatic. He's a charming kind of guy. Did I mention that he dated, after the war, he dated Betty White? Okay, there you go. So he's one of them. And another one is, slide please, Johnny Allison. Oh, the thing about Mr. Cochran here, about the colonel, is that he was more widely known. He was a combat pilot. He'd seen action in North Africa. But he's also this guy up on the upper left. He was in Milton Caniff's comic strip, Terry and the Pirates. He was probably the most famous sort of fly guy in the world here, and everybody knew that Phil Cochran was the basis for Terry and the Pirates. Okay. We get this all-star cast. You know, they're looking around. Who are we going to get for this? We get Johnny Allison. Johnny Allison is a fighter ace from the Flying Tigers with 7 aerial victories. He's about this big, but he's one heck of a stick. You know, the guy can fly anything with wings. And fly it very well indeed. The 2 of them, did I mention they were fighter pilots? Anybody know any fighter pilots? There's a certain fighter pilot type. Okay. And so when Hap Arnold is said, guys, I've got an assignment for y'all. By the way, they were both scheduled to go to Europe and fight the Germans, and they were really wanting to get into what they call the big show. And when Arnold told him, you know, I've got this other thing for you, and we're going to send you back or over to Burma, and you're going to be working with the British. And both of them said, well, I can't really say what they said. This is mixed company, but they didn't want to go. They really didn't want to do this thing. And I'll just cut to the chase and said, you know, they were saying, absolutely not going to do it. And Hap Arnold essentially did this. He said, gentlemen, lieutenant colonels, I want you to count the number of stars on my shoulder. And they did. They said, yes, sir. Where would you like us to go, and what would you like us to do? You understand that? Yeah. But he said, okay, they want some light planes, but I think this is the opportunity for us to turn this into something more than that. You have carte blanche. And by the way, just to sweeten the deal, okay, the hell with paperwork. Get out there and fight. And that's what they wanted to hear. So he said, come up with a plan, and in a couple of months, they put things together, and they ended up with the personnel that they wanted. It was an all-star cast. Let's take a look at some of them. Anybody heard of this guy, Jackie Coogan? A few of you may have. He was the best known, best paid child actor from the 1920s and 30s. Okay? And to bring you a little further into the 20th century, he was Uncle Fester in the Addams Family. Okay, Jackie Coogan was recruited as a glider pilot, one of many. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, a guy named Dick Cole. Some of you may have heard of him. Okay, he visited downtown Tokyo fairly early in the war. And dropped some calling cards on Tokyo just 4 months after Pearl Harbor. as Jimmy Doolittle's co-pilot in the first plane off the Hornet. Next slide. We have Buddy Lewis. He was an all-star third baseman for the Washington Senators, literally an all-star. When the war started, he became an aviation cadet. After pilot training, as he was sent over to fly the hump, where he flew 250 missions over the rock pile, as they call it. He flew over the Washington Senators' ball yard in the middle of a game and dragged the field in a C-47, just to say goodbye to his buddies. Okay. Nobody got the tail number. There were some others. We got a guy named Patt Meara. That's him in the center there in a rickshaw in Calcutta. Okay, and he's with us today. Okay. Someone else named, we go, Bill Cartwright and his L5 called Paper Doll. There we have it. Yeah. And that's him on the right, incidentally. Yeah. He had a mustache then he wanted me to know. We have a guy named Fred Van Wagner, and as you've already been introduced, his three sons are with us today. I would point out that he's wearing what appears to be a polo shirt, and he's wearing a pearl, at least an ivory handle 45. Maybe uniforms weren't exactly uniform during the day. Okay. The next slide is a guy that I hoped would be here, but unfortunately he died last year. He was at 19 years old, was one of the glider pilots, and he had some great stories for me. He was 19 years old, did I mention that? Charlie Turner. Of the 523 men recruited by these guys for this first Air Commando little venture into Burma, they recruited a whole series of different kinds. Back in the day, the pilots were divided, essentially on what they flew. So we got the combat pilots, the wings there at the top. Service pilots were the older guys who had been flying for some time, and they said, we need you to drive our airplanes, and you already know how to drive airplanes, so they ran them through a quick little course, a quick little check ride, and made them service pilots. That's the S. And then the L were the guys that flew the smaller airplanes. And then the G was for gliders. Glider pilots always said the G stood for guts. Yeah. Does anybody here fly a glider? Anyone? Well, I do. And I have to say that at this point that flying a glider is a lot like flying an aircraft, except it's quieter. Right? There's one major drawback to gliders. There aren't any go-arounds. You got to stick that landing the first time. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But of those 523 original Air Commandos, 300 were pilots. That was the skill that they valorized, first of all. To get into this group, you had to come with a recommendation from somebody that knew you and thought you were a pretty good stick, pretty good pilot. But you also had to have a secondary skill, and a tertiary skill, or a third one, was really valued by these guys. If they were going to have a small group, they wanted the folks to be able to do just about anything that they needed done. I'm not going to have time up here to tell you a lot of the stories that make this a really interesting tale about the characters that they became, or were perhaps, when they went in. But one of the ways in which they recruited, I know that Dick Cole got this call from Johnny Allison himself, and essentially said, well, I know you just got back, from a year of flying the hump, and I know that you were on the Doolittle raid, but, we're starting another little thing over here, and, well, you come highly recommended. Would you be interested in a job? And he said, I can't tell you anything about it. Can't tell you what we're going to do, really, but it's going to be really, really dangerous, and it's going to be in close proximity to the enemy. And Dick said, okay, sign me up. What do you do with guys like that? You sign them up. And that's what they did. So the next one was to think about the equipment. Okay, let's make this thing to fighter pilots. Remember, they're planning this. Okay, what we need. Okay, we're going to do what he said. Let's get us about 100 of these L5 Sentinel, little grasshopper kind of airplanes. That'll do it. Okay, next slide, please. Wait a minute, these guys are going to need some protection. say the fighter pilots. So why don't we get us, oh, look, we can get us a dozen or so of these B-25Hs, which were absolute killing machines. Not only did they have all the machine guns in the nose, but they had 75 millimeter cannon mounted in there. That's a 3-inch diameter